Hello, everybody. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for joining us. We got a special guest coming in with Sean Hastings later, host of What Happened to Syria podcast. Sean Hastings is an icon, indeed.
An Israeli attack on a Syrian airbase has been widely condemned. The US Special Envoy warns it could have caused a direct confrontation with Turkish forces. So why did Israel attack the base? And what are the implications? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Anna Burns-Francis. Israel's attack on a Syrian airbase risked causing a direct confrontation with Turkish forces. That's the warning from the US ambassador to Turkey and Special Envoy Tom Barrack. Tuesday's strike in northern Syria near the Turkish border has been sharply condemned by Syria, Turkey and the Arab League. It also comes despite strong Trump administration support for Syria's President Ahmed al-Sharaa, who led forces which toppled the Assad regime in December of 2024. Since then, Israel has destroyed military facilities across Syria to prevent the country rearming. It also occupies part of Syria, including Golan Heights. So, why did Israel launch this attack on an airbase? What are the implications for all sides? We'll talk to our guests shortly, but first, this report from Alexandra Byers.
First came the fighter jets, then the explosions.
We didn't know where the strikes hit at first, then we heard they were at the airbase. My children were sleeping and I was awake. The children and family got scared and all the neighbours around woke up.
According to Syrian state TV, 8 Israeli airstrikes hit this military airbase in the northwest, damaging its runway and storage facilities, but not causing any injuries. It's Israel's latest attack on Syrian soil since March. The Syrian Foreign Ministry called it an unjustified act of aggression, putting regional stability at risk. The airfield has been out of service since 2013. But it's just 70 kilometers from the Turkish border. Israel's accusing Damascus of allowing Turkish troops to deploy within Syria, saying Israel and Syria agreed to a security status quo, which Syria was on the verge of breaching by allowing Turkish troops to deploy. Israel warned Syria this would pose a threat to Israel's security, and Syria chose to ignore those warnings. The Turkish president dismissed the allegations as frivolous, saying they aim to legitimize Israel's unlawful airstrikes targeting Syria's sovereignty.
Yeah, just don't believe anything Israel is saying. Like, that's utter horse shit, bro. Like, they have completely twisted the narrative upside down. Like, they're the ones coming into Syria uninvited, completely on their own terms, and increasing their presence, while Turkey has actually been, despite actually being, like, collaborating with the army to try to, revitalize their security forces or whatever, they've actually been moving out of bases in the north of Syria. Like, this is complete utter horse shit coming from Israel right now. I'm sure Israelis are buying it, but nobody else in the world actually believes what the hell they're saying, including the USA.
And the accusations stem from what he called Netanyahu's expansionist and destabilizing policies in the region ahead of elections in Israel. Israel has systematically bombed the Syrian Air Force, launching hundreds of attacks since the Assad regime was toppled in late 2024. It says it's determined to keep the new administration from rebuilding Syria's military capacity. That's despite Syria's President Ahmed al-Sharaa saying he wants peaceful relations with Israel and seeks a security agreement between the two. Israel's also opposed to a substantial Turkish presence in Syria. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has been a vocal critic of Netanyahu's government and its genocide in Gaza. But the latest Israeli attack also comes into conflict with U.S. policy towards Syria. Washington's been forging close ties with President Sharaa, making him the first Syrian leader to ever visit the White House. The U.S. ambassador to Turkey and Special Envoy Tom Barrack condemned the attacks as an unnecessary escalation, saying Sharaa's government wasn't predatory
Turkey sounds so funny, man, but I guess it's better than Turkey, but it's Turkey.
or maintaining proxy forces, and has repeatedly indicated a preference for de-escalation with Israel. Barrack says the U.S. will continue to host diplomatic discussions to try to prevent any future attacks. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests for today's show. Joining us from Ankara is Murat Yeşiltaş, Director of Foreign Policy Research at the CETA think tank. In London, Hayan, Consulting Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House. And from Whitefish, Montana, Michael Mulroy, a former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for the Middle East. A warm welcome to all of you. Thank you. Murat, I'll start with you. What is the message being sent by Israel by this strike?
I think that there are different types of message that Israel is trying to give to Syria and Turkey. I think first and foremost, it's about, at least here in Ankara, many believe that it's a campaign tool for Netanyahu. Israel needs an enemy, and Turkey fits, I think, this description about the enemy, the next enemy of Turkey. And so therefore it is understood as part of Netanyahu's political campaign. It will be useful for Israel in the context of its domestic struggle to win the election. Beyond that political narratives, I think there are also other driving factors behind the Israeli airstrike in Syria. Of course, the military context is really important in that context. And as we know, there is an agreement between Syria and Turkey in terms of calibrating and strengthening Syrian security and military capacity. And and we know that Israel, I think, is opposing to establish a sustainable, strong military capacity of Syria. Number two is especially about containing the Turkish presence, military presence in Syria. There has been already a consensus and status quo agreements between Turkey and Israel and Syria, of course. But by targeting Idlib, which is really close to Turkish border, I think Israel is signaling to Turkey that Turkey should be limited its military presence in the context of its own influence, area of influence in the north, because we know that based on the open source sources, Turkey has preparing to establish military base in Idlib. I think this is a reaction against Turkish preparation to establish a new military base under the context of agreement between Turkey and Syria.
Hey, can I come to you? Given what Murat has just said about the relationship between Turkey and Syria as it stands at the moment, can Israel justify this strike?
Well, from their point of view, they're trying to say that the status quo has changed. But if you look at least the Israelis' own red lines, since the fall of the regime, you would notice that even their own red lines have shifted. At the beginning, they started saying that we don't want a military zone or demilitarized zone around southern Syria, closer to the deconflicting lines between Syria and Israel. Then they said that we don't want any Turkish presence in central or southern Syria. Now we are seeing even more, like another shift in their narrative, saying that even any change in the status quo will not be accepted, given the fact that Turkey has already military presence on the floor, on the ground in Syria, and Syria is a sovereign country, and the attack itself has not been, there's no reason that provoked it directly. And if you give on top of that, the fact that Syria has been trying to breach some sort of security arrangement with Israel, you would see that all of those factors don't mean that the attack itself was not justified. And this is why you have seen condemnation from all the countries in the region and beyond.
Michael, can we pick up on Hayes' comment there that the status quo has changed, was Israel's argument? In fact, if we read the statement, they said Syria was on the verge of breaching. They're not even claiming that it was a direct breach. How difficult is it, Michael, to work out where the red line is if you are Syria or Turkey at this point?
Also, to start with, after the war in Gaza started and continued, the relationship between Turkey and Israel deteriorated substantially. And of course, after al-Nusra took over, Israel immediately moved to essentially destroy as much as they could of the Syrian military. So this is kind of a continuation on that, those 2 points. As far as, from a practical standpoint, if they thought that Turkey was going to deploy multiple military units to this base, the only real opportunity without directly attacking Turkey, which is a NATO ally of the United States, would be to obstruct the airfield. And that's what it sounds like they did. So I think they would say they deliberately did so before Turkish forces got there. They chose to do it in a manner that didn't injure or kill anybody. Not that justifies it under international law, but they seem to be trying to mitigate both to prevent these Turkish forces from deploying, but also not cause a larger rift, which is already happening, I believe, between Israel and the United States.
Can we talk about that rift a bit further? Do you think this is a sign? There's been a lot of speculation about the relationship between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump of late. But this is also being described, this particular strike, as a sign of extraordinary defiance by Israel. And I'm wondering if it's maybe not just domestic politics for Benjamin Netanyahu that is driving this, but that he is now willing to publicly show that defiance or that lack of respect for his relationship with someone he once described as a good friend.
Yes, I think that's a fair point. I do think domestic politics does play a lot. Obviously, the election coming up on October.
Yo, if I'm being a bit honest here, I think Syria doesn't get as much attention in the news as Lebanon and Palestine. So Israel is making the calculation that they know this is going to fly under the radar and nobody's going to talk about it, and nobody really gives a shit about Syrian sovereignty or Israeli incursions on Syrian soil. Syria just doesn't really get much mainstream attention. So I think Netanyahu is just kind of making the calculation this will show my electorate that I'm a boss, and it won't even really hinder U.S. relations that much. Tom Barak is going to say something, Trump's not going to do shit.
27th, I believe, is playing a big factor. He's publicly rejected the peace plan that the Board of Peace, which President Trump is the chairman of, put forward for Gaza. And doing it publicly, I think, is sending a statement primarily to his domestic audience, but he can't help but know that President Trump's going to have different feelings on that. Same issue or similar issue in Lebanon. And now, as you pointed out in your report, the United States does support the government of al-Nusra, and obviously the relationship between President Erdogan and President Trump's pretty strong. So doing this is going to further, I think, exacerbate the rift that's going on right now. It won't rupture the relationship or anything like that, but it certainly is going to be a challenge because this does go in the face of U.S. policy for multiple reasons.
Murat, can we talk about that point there that Michael raised at the beginning of his first answer? That the breakdown really, or if there was a breakdown to be had, occurred significantly over the conflict in Gaza, the way that Israel has bombed Gaza and Turkey has objection to that. And of course, the US does have a relationship with both Turkey and, of course, with Israel. How does that shift, I guess, the point in the middle between all three of these? How does the Venn diagram move for the US in terms of navigating that relationship with Turkey?
Yes, I think this triangle, the relationship of triangle is really important when we look at the historical, trajectories of the Middle Eastern politics. I mean, Turkey, United States, and Israel. But now is the conjecture and the status quo has, I think, dramatically changed. And United States, first of all, Turkey relationship is in good mood, and United States and Turkey has a lot of geopolitical priorities, common priorities. We, I think, have experienced these common converging priorities in Syria. I mean, Turkey and United States have already solved their divergences over the issue of YPG. And when we look at the wider geographical strategic landscape, there are also a lot of convergences between United States and Turkey. But unfortunately, we can't.
Hello everyone, Sean is on the line. Sorry we couldn't get the video up, had a few technical difficulties. We're gonna react to this video together. Sean, just let me know when you want to pause and say something, and then we'll go into a more discussion kind of thing.
Yeah, hey y'all, everybody. Thanks for having me on, Hayan.
Of course, my pleasure, man. Thank you for being here. So we're already into it a little bit. You didn't miss too much. Just I think it seems like all three of them are on the same side, not gonna lie, but we'll keep going. We'll see how it goes.
And the narratives has dramatically changed. It is not possible to see any sort of a near rapprochement between two countries because of the Israeli genocidal policies in Gaza. I think this is number one. It is not only about this. I think when we look at the Israeli security policies, we also see a huge dramatical change in terms of the military doctrine. So it will directly bring a sort of confrontation points between Israel and Turkey. And when we look at the Syrian case, I think Syria is an exceptional and existential file for Turkey for a number of reasons. Security, of course, is one of the important ones, but other problems in Syria, because Syria is in a transitionary period in which Turkey is trying to support a lot. And when we look at Israel is trying to undermine the entire security architecture in Syria and politically transition period. But when we look at the Israeli-US context, there are also a lot of problems in terms of prioritizing what will be the next in the context of Syria and in the Middle East. But we can say that US can play a lot of constructive role in terms of the escalating situation between Turkey and Israel. Now Turkey is really cautious and really careful in terms of not engaging any direct military confrontation against Israel in Syria. But there are a lot of cases that can be an accidental issue between two countries. So therefore, US can play a role over Israel and over Turkey, as we saw in the message of Tom Barak.
Hey, can I ask you here, because there's another three-way relationship, which is the one between Israel, Syria and the US. Do you think Israel feels threatened by Syria's renewed efforts to join the world stage and to make that diplomatic outreach with the US?
Well, basically Israel is framing the whole situation and from basically that lens. But if you look at the actions of the new government in Syria or new authorities in Syria, you'd see that they have not done anything to indicate that they have any sort of ill intent towards Israel. From the beginning, they have said that we are ready to discuss through political channels any concerns that Israel has and then try to address that in a peaceful way. However, Israel did not choose to go through that sort of diplomatic channel. For me, I think what the American speaker, sorry, I forgot his name now, mentioned about the tense relationship between Netanyahu and Trump is not only a matter of basically winning the elections. It's a matter of basically survival for Netanyahu. And unless he wins the upcoming elections, he could basically go to jail. So I think we should not overestimate the importance of the risk that Syria currently poses or could potentially pose towards Israel, but rather focus at why Netanyahu is basically choosing this path. Because if you look at the situation from the Israeli perspective, I think we have to differentiate between the interests of Israel and the interests of Netanyahu personally, and those are not the same.
Yeah, Michael, can we talk more about the messaging then out of America? Because the US Ambassador Tom Barak the envoy, has been quite forceful in his words and the language he's used. He's called this strike serious, worrisome, unnecessary was the language he used. As of late, there were other comments made recently about a Turkish military installation at Damascus airport. Israel was pushing that this was a threat to its security. Barak said the civilian infrastructure does not pose a security threat to Israel. There is a lot of pushback here in that messaging that we are seeing from the US, but does it go any further than simply making those public comments?
Also, it's important to point out that's from the U.S. ambassador to Turkey. So yes, that is what we would expect it to be. I imagine Ambassador Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, isn't saying the same statements. That's not to mean that they're not important, but ultimately it's the White House statement that's going to be controlling on this issue. And I think it's a delicate balance. I mean, the U.S. has accepted al-Shura as the government, as you mentioned in your report, the first Syrian leader to come to the White House, but Israel never has. They never bought into the reformed jihadists from Jilani to al-Shura. So it's clear that there's a complete different perspective from Israel and the United States on this. I think that's not going to be resolved, quite frankly, certainly not with the current government in Israel. And I do agree, when it comes to these elections, it's not just the political life of Prime Minister Netanyahu. It's potentially, serious legal jeopardy if he's no longer the prime minister. So he has every intention to try to remain in office. And right now, although it's far from determined, his coalition is behind the coalition of Hayan. So this is something I think he's looking at. He's going to try to do everything he can to maintain his position for multiple different reasons.
You mentioned there that Israel has never accepted this new government of Ahmed al-Sharaa. Is there any reason why they should? There would be an argument that regional instability in Syria serves to Israel's benefit, that it destabilizes one country that keeps the attention away from Israel.
So if that's the intent of Israel, then this would be one way to do it. In the United States, I think most countries in the region or outside of the region would like to see stability in the Middle East. So if there was a normalization of relationships between Damascus and Tel Aviv, this would be, I think, to the benefit of the region. But obviously, you can see by Prime Minister Netanyahu's actions that that's not his intent. I mean, he's sent troops into southern Lebanon, he sent troops into southern Syria, and many would say he really pushed the United States to go to war with Iran, and is currently pushing for that to resume as a full-scale war. So stability doesn't seem to be the aim of Prime Minister Netanyahu in the region.
Murat, Turkey clearly views its role here as having an ability to help ensure Syrian stability and a path forward. Does it need American support to achieve that?
Well, I think, yes. I mean, it's not limited to with Syria. And from a broader perspective, I think Turkey is trying to establish a sustainable regional order. There are a lot of attempts to do this, to achieve this. But when it comes to Syria, I think there are a lot of challenges. And we have not been speaking fairly about the challenges in Syria since the dramatical changes in our region after the fall of Assad regime, including the war between Israel, United States, and Iran. I think it dramatically changed the strategic landscape and the way in which the actors' position and understanding about the region. So still, I think Turkey needs regional country support in Syria. It is not only an issue that Turkey can do with its own capacity. I think in that context, United States' role is really important, especially in that context.
Yes, Sean.
We're watching a period of transition in real time. And for that reason, we have all these unanswered questions going on. And all we can say is that, like, this is one of the most consequential shifts in geopolitics since maybe 1991. But the fall of the Soviet Union, it's not just the biggest change in the Middle East, it's one of the biggest geopolitical changes on the planet. And so I can't address all the various things they were talking about there. But the fact that we got all this stuff, just this flurry of new developments and unanswered questions now, it really shows how much the fall of Assad has changed the region and the world.
Yeah. And do you think it can be traced back to October 7th, or was it already kind of developing?
That's complicated, like everything related to Syria. I think October 7th was part of it.
I think it was the biggest catalyst to this change.
Actually, you know what? I really think it was the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think it was actually the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think that was more so the real, beginning of the end for Assad. Because, I mean, to a certain extent, Iran was more intimately involved with the Assad regime, but Russia was like the real firepower. Once Russia got bogged down in Ukraine, then it was Assad should have fled to Moscow right then and there, honestly. There's literally, there are videos of al-Sharaa back in July or summer of 2012 where he was telling his guys, I'm going to see you guys in Aleppo soon. So it's very likely he was planning what ended up being, I forget the operation.
Deterrence of aggression.
Deterrence of aggression, yeah. Yeah, so it looks like, from what I've seen, it looked like al-Sharaa was planning deterrence of aggression before October 7th. But when October 7th happened, as you know, man, that set the whole region on fire. It was kind of like when ISIS showed up and the whole board got flipped over and everyone's trying to figure out what the fuck do we do now. Sorry. Am I allowed to swear here?
Yeah, it's all good. Don't worry about it.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've lived through some really chaotic years with some unprecedented developments, some real plot twists, if you will. I don't think October 7th was the event that signaled Assad's downfall, but it was one of the steps towards it. I think Ukraine was more important, but after October 7th, especially, this is the big deal, especially because Hezbollah got real big into fighting Israel. They recommitted to that fight, and not when Russia pulled resources out of Syria, that hurt the Assad regime. When Iran and Hezbollah pulled resources out of Syria to focus on Israel, that also hurt the Assad regime.
Yeah, it made the deterrence of aggression job a lot easier, not gonna lie. But it's interesting to think because even if you blame the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you could even bring it back to the Crimean annexation to even. So you can always keep going backwards and seeing like, oh, where did it start? But in my opinion, I think October 7th was absolutely like, because like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you could say maybe Europe was really affected by it, but the region of the Middle East was not seeing much of the fallout. I guess maybe like there was some grain deals that was, and then yeah, I think October 7th was a big catalyst. But okay, we'll continue on with the video and then move on to the other topics soon.
Potential military confrontation between Israel and Turkey. I think this is not a benefit for Israel. This is not a benefit for region in Syria and Turkey, of course. But of course, I think one thing I have to mention regarding the Israeli position, as the speakers also mentioned, I think there are differences between the different institutions inside Israel. So Netanyahu, yes, he's really eager to use Turkey as a framework of threats for domestic consumption during the election campaign. But I know a lot of institutions and different figures within Israel, from especially military institution, that confronting with Turkey is not a good idea. I think, and the second one, they believe that presence of Turkey inside Syria will also benefit for Israeli security. I mean, I know that this is a really interesting understanding from a Turkish perspective, but many believe that if Turkey can consolidate Syrian security, at the end of the day, Israel will also benefit from this security. I think this is really important, and many US officials understand the situation from this perspective.
Hey, can we go back to your comment that you made earlier about red lines and shifting red lines? Is there any benefit to Syria engaging in diplomatic talks with Israel through the US? Is there any plan that would make its security more assured and remove Israel's presence more?
Well, let's be honest, Syria does not have that many options right now. And I think the only option, which is as well the best option, is to continue the basic case efforts to reach some sort of diplomatic or security arrangement through the US. The US has not been able to finalize an agreement between the two, but the US has been able to make a lot of progress in basically narrowing down the differences, reaching common ground between the two countries. However, I think we also have to be quite sort of realistic about what could be achieved before the elections. It's clear that Netanyahu is not interested in de-escalating, is not interested in reaching an agreement before the elections. But that's why I think everyone is now waiting to see what will happen in the elections, because most of the sort of analysis indicates that if there is a change in government inside Israel, then the whole basically position towards Syria will be different, and potentially a deal could be easier to be reached or to be concluded. However, even if Netanyahu stays in power, I think his calculations might also change a bit, and the pressure that the US could put on him might make that last mile easier to sort of cross.
So, Michael, who makes the next move then? Because the election is still a couple of months away. Does Syria sit back and wait to see what happens? Does Turkey take a proactive approach and go into negotiations with one of these parties?
So I don't know that much will change. I would agree with both of my fellow guests. There are elements within the Israeli national security structure that would take a different approach towards Syria and potentially Turkey. And it might be that the main opposition figure, Gadi Eisenkot, is reflective of those opinions, because he was the former chief of staff of the IDF. So I don't know, of course, can't pretend to say what he would do, but I think a lot of people are looking at him as a potential, if he is, in fact, the prime minister, would change a lot of the current policies of Prime Minister Netanyahu in a way that would be more stabilizing for the region. So we'll have to see who comes out on top. I don't pretend to be a political analyst at all, let alone for Israeli politics. But there is a potential that after this election on October 27th, if a government is formed different from the current one, that we could see a substantial shift, at least when it comes to the regional issues, such as the issue with the Syrian government in Lebanon and potentially even Gaza.
Michael Mulroy joining us from Whitefish, Montana, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for the Middle East, and Ankara in Turkey, Murat Yeşiltaş, Director of Foreign Policy Research at the Kaszeta think tank, and from London, Haid, a Consulting Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House. Gentlemen, thank you all for your time on the show. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime.
All right. So, what do you think, Sean?
Well, I must say, two things. First of all, thank you so much for having me on the show, man. I really appreciate it. I love talking about Syria. I haven't had a chance to do this in way too long, so this is awesome. Thank you so much, man. Secondly, I really was not expecting to come face to face with Mick Mulroy on this live stream. Like I watch him on the Eyes on Geopolitics podcast. He's not the only person on there. There's like 4 different hosts on there. They all disagree with each other. It's a great show. It's a mixture of military veterans, CIA people, and people who know stuff. It's a really informative show. I really recommend it. Yeah, man, it's there's a lot going on. There's a lot to talk about. Where do you want to start?
It's up to you. So I think in regards to the elections right now, I haven't been following like Israeli politics very much, but it's hard to see at the end of Netanyahu. Honestly, like it's easier just to imagine like a normalization deal after the elections, definitely, but it's hard to imagine any shift in politics in Israel until then. I do like what Haid said. Like he's right. We don't have many options, and it is best to just continue on this diplomacy track and just sit back and wait and kind of take bite the bullet of Israeli incursions and continuous violations to our sovereignty until we even have sovereignty to be able to leverage. But other than that, like I really don't have much to comment on other than like what I said at the beginning before you joined us, was that like Turkey is trying to help us reinforce our security, build it back up. Israel is very like determined to make sure that doesn't happen, and so they're gonna give any lie saying that, oh, you know, Syria was actually about to violate its agreement with Israel to do this and that, and like complete crap. And they've been moving the goalposts over and over again, saying first they want a security, like demilitarized zone in the south, and then they're saying like nothing in central Syria, and now even North Syria is a red line. So it's pretty transparent to me. There's not much to really analyze other than it's just usual Israeli antagonizing everyone around them and kind of getting away with it because USA isn't really going to do anything to stop them.
Yeah, when it comes to Israel, especially when it comes to like their military actions, I'm always torn. Like I always wait to. I always try to find evidence to see if it fits into one of two categories. Is it poorly thought? Is it a poorly thought out overreaction to a perceived threat, or is it a pretext to steal territory? Frankly, they've done both in the past. So I'm not quite sure what the Syria situation is at the moment. The worst case scenario would be if they tried to like annex Ceuta, which it seemed at one point like they wanted to do.
Right.
And that would be a disaster because in order to do that, they'd have to go straight through Dara. And bro, you know better than I do that post Syria will never give up Dara.
Yeah, that's just not going to happen. And I think they know that though, so I think they've ruled that out completely, and they've even begun to cut funds towards Ceuta. So like they're slowly, you know, letting them know that, you know, we can't actually back you very, very long. But if you're good with that, then let's move on to Ghouta anniversary. I commented on it a little bit at the beginning. When it comes to anniversaries, you know how it is with the Syrian calendar. There's an anniversary of an attack every day of the year. So unless there's like some news that you've read on the Ghouta massacre and like the people being prosecuted for it, have you read anything in particular about it?
I think the best thing we could do right now would be recommend some sources to the audience. I would particularly recommend a book called Toxic by Dan Kaszeta. It's not exclusively about the Ghouta massacre, but it's about like the history of chemical weapons and chemical warfare, and Ghouta plays a very prominent role in that.
Okay. Yeah, that's another thing I love about you is, you're very well read. I don't read many books. I'm more like an article, research papers, like journalist kind of guy. But yeah, definitely love that you can always like bring up a different book that you've read on the subject to increase like awareness.
You know, sometimes it's a cop out on my part. It's like if I don't have an answer on hand, I'll just cite something.
Just be like, oh, I read this book once. No, but like that's important to put into perspective that like chemical warfare was taboo for a while, and it like Assad just brought it completely back. We can talk about like how Obama kind of set the red line of chemical attacks and then reneged on it, and then entered into a deal with Putin to kind of disarm the chemical weapons in Syria so that Assad could stay, basically.
Quick, just so we can like tell the audience, especially if we have anyone on here who doesn't know what we're talking about, the Ghouta massacre was one of the single worst massacres of the Syrian civil war. Obviously, there were massacres happening every day, but this one, at least 1,000 people were killed in a single neighborhood. That's a small space for a massacre to happen. You know, the stuff that happened like in on the coastline last year or in Ceuta last year, that was a wider geographic area. So like while a similar number of people were killed, it was not as closely confined as Ghouta and Modamia, these neighborhoods in Damascus. Also, it's really striking. They look, obviously there are reasons for it, and I could explain the reasons. I don't want to bog us down with context, but I just want to emphasize to the audience, the Assad regime used weapons of mass destruction in their capital city. That's unheard of.
Yeah, and the biggest argument when that happened was all about, oh, does the chlorine sink in the Syrian, and like people were trying to bring up all these chemical like conversation. Like I'm not like, chemistry was literally my worst science subject, so I knew that I was always screwed if I was going to talk about that. But stuff like, you know, it came from the sky and only Assad had air power were already just big enough proofs so that you didn't have to get into all like, oh, this looks, were the people in the basements, weren't they supposed to be on the roofs to avoid the gas, and does it sink or does it float? All this other stuff was like complete bullshit to try to distract from the actual conversation. Of course it was Assad, and of course he, like, people say like, oh, why would he be stupid enough to do it? He was stupid enough to do it, and he got away with it, so it wasn't even that stupid.
Yeah, he did it because he could. because he had nerve agents, which are the deadliest chemical weapons in the world.
Yeah.
And just to address real quick the conspiracy theories that like, oh, the rebels did it to themselves, which is just stupid. We can actually look at instances where ISIS actually did perpetrate confirmed chemical weapons attacks. There was at least one instance where one rebel group called Jaish-e-Islam alleged, this is an unconfirmed incident, okay, unconfirmed. Allegedly, they may have put some sarin in a rocket or a mortar and fired it at some people in Aleppo. Allegedly, unproven. Here's the thing. Every single instance of chemical warfare that was tied to somebody other than the Assad regime produced a much, much smaller number of casualties than all of the chemical attacks linked to the Assad regime, which is like 99% of them. I mean, every time the Assad regime deployed sarin, hundreds of people died. At least 1,000 people, more than 1,000 people died in Ghouta. You only get that with nerve agents. You don't get that with anybody can make chlorine. Yeah, almost anyone can make mustard gas. ISIS figured out mustard gas.
Exactly. Yeah.
Only a nation state can use sarin. And sarin or other nerve agents is when you see thousands of people or hundreds of people. That's like nerve agents are what Saddam Hussein used in Halabja, put simply.
Yeah.
I mean, 5,000 people were killed in one day in Halabja. That's what nerve agents can do.
And Emma is saying in chat, no. So Emma's saying in chat, I tried telling people the chemicals came from the Air Force, and then they say, oh, it came from rockets that the rebels had. But rebels had like shoulder-mounted rockets. They didn't have an Air Force that literally allowed it to drop from the sky. The SNHR did some good graphics about the attacks in perspective. Yeah, and there's also like GPPI that also investigated all of the chemical attacks in Syria and determined that like 99% were determined to be by Assad. The 0.1% that you're talking about are the mustard attacks from ISIS, and then I don't think they even included that Jaish-e-Islam one because it wasn't confirmed. They were going off of specifically confirmed attacks.
I usually don't include it.
Yeah.
I only brought it up just in case some tankies brought it up.
But okay, moving on to next subject. SDF disbandment. They officially said that they have disbanded and that 99% of the issues are resolved. So far, the YPGA, which is like their female force, was the only holdout really. Just opening thoughts on the integration. I personally still don't trust these people. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I think there has to be like, even with former rebels, like there has to be more schooling to kind of get them out of the revolutionary mindset and into a states mindset where, we're protecting Syrians. We're no longer looking out for the like this specific sector, that specific sector. Like everyone is with you, and also. But no, actually, just go ahead and if you have anything to say on that, what do you think about that?
I have to make an embarrassing confession. I had heard about the incorporation into the military. I hadn't heard that they disbanded today. That's news to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, like they've said it a couple of times already, but Muslim Abdi just came out and said it again today, so we'll see. And even like they're still 99%, so they'll keep making this announcement over and over. And
that's the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, like I don't take it seriously. I mean, as far as I can tell, I wouldn't be surprised if like even after the SDF officially dissolves, they're gonna unofficially still exist. Kind of like, I mean, not to say they're equal, but like the SNA, the Syrian National Army, that coalition of Turkish-backed rebel groups. They don't officially exist anymore, but unofficially, those networks still are together. They still hang out. They still talk, and they coordinated during the offensives and on the coast. And I think also in I gotta look up whether those guys were involved in Sweden or not. Probably
they were, yeah. But I think there was more coordination in the coast where they're closer, and some of them are even from the coast. So yeah, I know what you mean. But in terms of like their commanders and stuff, they've been completely. I mean, I don't know. You saw what his name, Abu Amsha, like he was recently demoted. I think Shara has been pretty good at sidelining the kind of power brokers of SNA, and so I'm hoping that's also what he'll do with SDF. I wish to see Sipan Hamsho or Sipan Hamar or whatever, and Mazloum Abdi and what's her name, Ilham Ahmed also kind of get sidelined. I don't want to see them become like the representatives of the Kurds or whatever in Syria.
Right.
I like how like in the parliament he put KDP people instead. That was amazing. That's a great move because they're the ones that actually stood by anti-Assad Syrians, and SDF was the one that kind of was more beholden to PKK and made different calculations during the war. Other than that, I think in regards to the women's units that were, they got the offer to become basically an interior ministry forces, which is like anti-terrorism units. And I think it's a good deal. Take it, man. I'm surprised that they. I mean, I don't think that there's any reason that we shouldn't have women in the army. I don't understand that. I don't understand. I don't get why the Ministry of Defense is against it. I understand they're conservative or whatever, but we're a republic. We're not a theocracy or anything like that. They should be willing to integrate women into their forces, but the compromise of getting their own anti-terrorism combat unit, like, it's not a bad one. I think they should take it. But also, I think they should be dispersed. Like, I don't like the idea of them remaining in units, because I also feel like if they remain organized and united, then, like, as soon as Sueda does something, or if they see that the Syrian army is vulnerable, I would not put it beyond them to, like very quickly reorganize and ally with al-Hijri or with Israel if the opportunity came, or if, like, they were proposed to do a David's corridor. Like, I still see them as, like, I can't help but feel like I treat them with suspicion, because they had their own agenda throughout the whole revolution, and they refused to compromise with us then, and now I can't help but feel like they were strong-armed into this. It wasn't a genuine integration. And they still don't accept defeat. Like, they still think that, I don't know, they still think that, like, you know, Kurdistan is going to happen someday or something, and it's like, let it go, dude.
Yeah. It's not ideal. It's risky, but so far, this is what has reduced, if not outright stopped, the killing.
Yeah.
And this might not be a sufficient solution for the long term, but in the short term, it has done some good. It's not ideal to see war criminals get promoted instead of being held accountable. But on the other hand, it's nice that Syria, at least most of Syria, at this point, I think almost all of Syria, is pretty much at peace. I have kept up more closely with that than the other parts of the SDF integration. Put simply, a lot of it just kind of popped up on my feed. Put simply, I noticed a lot of people I know on both sides of the issue were real passionate about it one way or another. And weirdly, you know what? Honestly, it's like the leadership of both sides want a peace deal, and then you got the rank and file on both sides who are still pissed at each other, and still want to fight each other. And, like,
that's true,
and that's cause for concern. When it comes to, like, the MOD versus MOI distinction, I personally think that MOI is a better place for the YPG and the YPJ, because especially if you look at the ideology of the PYD, their big thing is that they want local autonomy. They basically were strong-armed by the U.S.-led coalition into expanding into Arab-majority areas. They didn't want to do that. So it makes more sense for them to be in a Ministry of Interior unit providing local security, and in return they get to have a modicum of autonomy. So that makes more sense for the YPG and the YPJ in terms of incorporating SDF units into the Syrian government. However, one problem I've noticed is that actually a lot of people, let's just say some of these are like former members, some of these are just fans, if you will, just people I'm acquainted with. I noticed a lot of people in the YPJ orbit were angry about the YPG and YPG, especially the YPJ being incorporated into the Ministry of Interior. And their response was basically like, well, why shouldn't women be allowed into the MOD? Which is a fair question.
Absolutely.
I mean, we can, setting aside the context here, that particular question, you said it yourself. Like, yeah, ideally the MOD would. But we got to take a look at what is the MOD? What does the Syrian military look like? Oh, yeah, this is like, these guys are way more hardline conservative. Not all, but like generally the rank and file of the MOD are a lot more hardline and conservative.
Shouldn't even be part of the calculation, in my opinion.
MOI.
Sorry to interrupt, but that shouldn't even be part of the calculation, in my opinion. It's like they are literally military. They take orders. If Shara tells them you accept women, that's it, done. That's it. Like, there's no, it's the military. It's not a democracy, bro. You know what I mean?
Right. It should be that way.
Yeah.
It should be that way. It's gonna take time to get there, man.
Yeah.
It's gonna take time.
Yeah. Of course. Like, I'm not an absolutist. I won't take the hard position that, like, the woman should be allowed anywhere. But I get it. But I'm also straight up in saying that, like, it's bullshit. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I would be worried that, like, if the YPG was pulled into the MOD, I'd be worried about like there being like gunfights breaking out between these Apochi women and then these like I know not everybody in the MOD is like a Salafist with a thick beard, but some of them are, and not all Salafists with thick. Some of them are cool. Most of them are cool guys. But, like, you know, every group of people is bad individuals. So put simply, especially with the 14 years of bad blood, you know?
Absolutely.
Like, something's going to happen.
But that's why, like, I'm thinking of, like, you saw how, they started a university for defense or something, like Defense Sciences Department. I forget which area it was in. But that's what we should be focusing on, is stripping away this revolutionary dogma of all of the former rebels that are now military. They should realize they are a professional force that represents all of Syria, kind of moving on from that 14 years of bad blood. Like, everyone is doing it. Yeah. They should be able to do it. They're literally professionalized. Like, and take orders. Like, you're a military professor. Like, it's not, no one cares about your opinion. If your rank is low, doesn't matter what you think.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That is how military should function. Unfortunately, when you're building a new government right after a civil war, sometimes the commanders of certain, like, former factions, certain officers, if you will, hold a lot of sway in those early years. And I would not want Ahmed al-Shara's job. Yeah. He's got to navigate so many difficult situations.
Yeah, I don't envy the position they're in, but as, like, just civilian people, activists, whatever, like, I think it's fair to call out a little bit more than what the government is doing, because, like, we can, right? Like, the government has to uphold a certain narrative or uphold a certain, like, professionalism. You and I were just commenting on it. We can acknowledge that, like, ideally this would be the case.
Yeah. And there's we talked earlier that there are some unresolved threads to this whole SDF situation, especially regarding integration of an inclusive constitution.
I mean, I think the only thing was I guess they want Kurdish language all across Syria. That's one of the big holders. And then the name Arab should be out of the country's name. Like, I agree with that. But the English, like the Kurdish language stuff, localized is fine. I don't see a reason for it to be all across the country, or to make, like, Kurdish an official language. I still understand why, like, Arabic speaking,
maybe in major cities.
Yeah, for sure. Like Aleppo, Damascus, down, like, hands down for sure. But, like, Afrin, Kamishli, Hasaka, okay, fine. But, like, they don't really need it in, like, Sueda or, like, Deir ez-Zor, or, you know, or Daraa.
Yeah, there's no need for it. Yeah, it's like you know, if you go out, like, just go outside, walk in whatever neighborhood you live, like, you might see, like, signs in foreign languages, but that's because people who speak those languages live there.
Exactly. And that's where there are Kurdish signs. It's Hasaka, Khamishlo, and Afrin, and I mean, it's like look, Quneitra has Hebrew signs. I guess actually maybe they do teach Hebrew in there in Quneitra. That would be an interesting thing to look up. But yeah, I know they have, like, Hebrew signs in Quneitra. So, yeah. But okay, final comments goes to you if you want to add anything, and then we're moving on to the last topic, which is the nuclear file.
I wonder how Turkey feels about this whole, like, SDF integration.
Yeah. That could open up a whole other branch of conversation. I think Turkey is, like, I think they definitely came out the winner. You know, it was inevitable too. They were always going, like, SDF was always going to be abandoned. Turkey was always going to get its way. It was just, like, a matter of whether that was with Assad or with the rebels or whatever. But I think they're overseeing, like, a lot of the red lines of the integration and whatnot. So hopefully, in my opinion, like, actually, like, they're looking out for our interests too, because, like, I freaking can't stand YPG and SDF and, like, the whole Apochi ideology. So if they're making their integration more difficult because they want to make sure that the people who are integrated are fully vetted and, like, they've shed their ideology, good for me. Like, I'm okay with that, to be honest. I can't see how Turkey overseeing the integration process isn't kind of a benefit to us, because it is a Turkish ideology. Like, it's an ideology that was born in Turkey, from like the Kurdish lands of Turkey, that moved into Syria. That's not totally native to Syrians. So They should have a role to play in like bringing away those kinds of Apochi people, and increasing like the Syrian nationalism of the integration and of the YP. I didn't put that in the best terms, but I hope you understand what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, not to go off on I'll keep this short. I just want to make a real quick comment about like Syria versus Apochi ideology. Syrians have always been part of the PKK. Something like, I think I read somewhere that historically about a third of the PKK's fighters were Syrian Kurds or Syrians from other ethnic groups. Now that said, Abdullah Öcalan was a Turkish Kurd, hands down. There were also lots of people in the PKK who came from Iraq or Iran, and some of them ended up in Syria as YPG cadres. Yeah, so it's fair to say that, like, this is not a Syrian phenomenon, and when some of them went back, I mean, when the YPG was created, as the best I can tell from my research, it was created by Syrian Kurds. But some of these people, some of them had spent, like, extended periods of time outside of Syria, and then, like, I mean, as a result of the YPG being given sanctuary in Syria, there were parts of Syria, especially in, like, northern Syria, where Apochi ideology kind of influenced the local culture a little bit. Like, even still, like, most Kurds weren't into that stuff. And so my main point is that Apochi Kurds are somewhat disconnected from Syrian culture. And that's caused a lot of problems over the last 14 years with a lot of misunderstandings and unnecessary conflicts.
Yeah, and it's important to note that like the majority of Kurds in Syria are people who have like a connection to being Kurdish. So like they might have one parent that's Kurdish. They usually don't speak Kurdish. And if you want to include them as Syrian Kurds, which I think you should, there's no reason not to, except for politics. Then the majority of Kurds are outside of that PKK sphere in Syria. And so the few that are very close and bordered to Turkey, those are the ones that try to hijack the narrative for all Syrian Kurds and try to represent all of them. So yeah.
And bro, I know you hate it when people say "quote unquote" the Kurds, especially when Apochis say the Kurds. Like, unfortunately, it's sad that that's their rhetoric. That's a rhetoric tool. Öcalan invented that. But Western observers who don't know the history of the PKK, they hear PKK rhetoric and they take it literally. That's a big problem.
Absolutely.
One last book plug. Everybody listen to this. Go read Blood and Belief by Aliza Marcus. That's a really good book about the PKK. It is completely unbiased. There's no bias for it. There's no bias against them. It just lays out the facts, and damn, some of the facts are pretty ugly.
I'll take your word for it, and I'll check it out, and I'll put it in the description as well.
He's a real asshole in that book.
As he should, in an unbiased summary of his views. But okay, we'll cut it there. Dude, always feel free to plug books. That's amazing that you can think of books to bring up. So don't worry about don't make that the last one if you don't.
A lot of journalists who went to quote unquote Rojava had read that book before they went there.
Exactly. And yeah. But okay, we've gone on that tangent, and okay, let's move on. Let's address the nuclear stuff. Basically, in 2005, there was collaboration between Damascus and Assad and North Korea to try to get some secret military facility to develop uranium and enrich it and stuff like that. I think in 2007, Israel attacked it because obviously it has moles in Syria. It had spies in Assad's regime. It knew what was going on, and obviously its surveillance also was able to pick up on it. Yeah, so we had the IAEA kind of come in to investigate all of the uranium plants in Syria and to take stock of all the nuclear power the nuclear materials that we had. And what came as a surprise was the Syrian government said that we're going to keep it, whereas before it said it was going to give it up completely. But it said it's explicitly just for civilian energy. I saw a bit of debate about this on Twitter of dude, this is provocative. Of course, Israel is going to attack you if you're doing something like this. Look at Iran. Look at, you know what I mean? You can't have nuclear weapons or anything like that. Only Israel can have it. I'm not sure if I buy that it's going to be used for weapons. I think that Syria is not the only one. There's a framework being done right now with the major Arab states, like Saudi is trying to get civilian nuclear energy. I think UAE's already gotten it, but I think Jordan's already also in the process. Nuclear power is a very efficient form of energy. what is it, like some 1 cubic foot of nuclear, and I'm not a chemist, okay, I'm not going to use the right terms for this, but like literally like a nuclear reactor that takes up like a football field can light up a whole country or whatever. You know what I mean? Like the efficiency of the use of nuclear power outdoes solar, wind, coal, any other energy out there. So of course every country should be able to benefit from it. Turkey is also in the process of getting one made by Russia too. So it's becoming an increased desire for a lot of countries to have nuclear power. And so I support it. I don't know, what do you think? Is it provocative? Is the truth being said here? Is it possibly going to become weaponized, or what do you think?
I don't think it'll be weaponized. I don't see that happening, not in the near future. Actually, look, when it comes to Saudi Arabia, UAE, and potentially Egypt, there are easier ways for them to acquire nuclear weapons. We can go into that later. That's a complicated topic, but I think what's going on here, especially regarding that reactor that got destroyed by Israel in 2007, it's twofold. This is mostly for civilian purposes, especially because the Strait of Hormuz is blocked. That oil isn't being moved. That's causing an energy crisis. It's also a PR move. It's also a way for al-Shara to reach out to the international community and like, hey, this one of many things you were concerned about regarding Syria, here you go. Here's a concession. And,
the concession was to hand it over, though. But now they're saying we're keeping it, which is kind of...
Yeah, it sounds like there's some negotiations going on. It sounds like it hasn't been fully ironed out. But the thing is, it's been secured now.
And they're fully collaborating with the IAEA. Like, they open up everything, they let them in, and they're like, we want you to come investigate. So, you're still right there.
Which is... Yeah, that's huge. That's a good deal. It's good news. It's good news. It's a huge departure from the Assad regime, which, say whatever you will about a country's right to develop nuclear reactors. There's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it.
Absolutely.
The Assad regime did it the wrong way.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. How do you think...
Now, I don't know if...
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, you go ahead.
No, please.
I wouldn't put it past the Assad regime to have wanted to use the reactor for military purposes. I could also see them using it for, nuclear energy. But you know what? The reason why I say I think Assad wanted to build nukes was because they already had a weapons of mass destruction program. I want to make something very clear here. So WMD refers to very specific types of weapons which cause mass death on a scale that conventional weaponry just cannot. Nuclear weapons are the most famous. Chemical weapons are the second most famous. They're pretty much among the first ever invented. I mean, if you ever watch World War I movies and people die from toxic gas, that's a weapon of mass destruction. There are literally international treaties that ban all forms of weapons of mass destruction. It's not normal for them to be used in war. Even with all the war crimes that happen in every war, most people don't resort to WMD use. The last category, there's another category and then a subcategory. The last category is biological warfare. So, weaponizing diseases, that's a thing. Hopefully we never get a pandemic from it. Hopefully. The last subcategory of WMD, and this is actually very relevant to Iran, is called a radiological weapon or a dirty bomb. So basically that's when you take uranium and instead of enriching it into nuclear material, instead of creating a nuclear bomb, you create a bomb that spreads radiological material and it poisons people. It irradiates an area. This WMDs cause damage on a scale that is just intolerable to the human species, put simply. And the fact that the Assad regime had a WMD program dating back to at least the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War. They started developing chemical weapons by the way, you want to know who helped Assad develop his chemical weapons? The Egyptians.
Right.
Nobody knows that Egypt has a chemical weapons program, but they do.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's wild. But simply, we know that the Assad regime had a WMD program because they gassed Ghouta, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, and I hate how the word WMD became so politicized with Iraq and Saddam and stuff, because it's just the truth. We're not trying to say he has WMDs, that's why he had to go. He was a bad person, whether he had WMDs or not. But I love how WMDs became such a salient word that it's like if you accuse a leader of doing it, that must mean you just want a regime change, you want to occupy the country, you want this that. It's like, nah, bro, this is like,
it kind of goes both ways, because like if they are alleged to have them and they don't, or if they're alleged to be developing them, then it can be used as a pretext to attack them. But if they're alleged to like have like an arsenal of nuclear missiles like North Korea, then they're kind of untouchable.
True. And North Korea does kind of prove that, like, if you do, if you can survive the ostracization, and if you can just develop the nukes, like, you might wind up on the other end successful, because, you know, at least nobody can touch him now, you know, without serious consequences.
Yeah. Also, it's funny we circle back to North Korea, because that's how this whole facility in Syria got built. You know, the Assad regime and the Kim regime had close relations, and you know, it could be that at that time, 2005, Assad probably saw what was going on in Iraq. He was supporting the Sunni insurgency in Iraq.
Yeah.
And it's possible he looked at that and he thought, you know, North Korea, they seem pretty safe at the moment. I want some nukes. Maybe that's what happened. Also, man, good Lord, could you imagine if Assad had nukes in 2011? Holy shit.
I mean, imagine how many uprisings have been snuffed out in Korea that we just never hear about because it's a hermit kingdom and nobody's even going to try to do a regime change there because they know the consequences. Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, I can. Maybe it's actually even so good at like brainwashing its people that there have been no uprisings. I don't know. Because we just don't know anything about that country, right? Except recently we've heard that like it's an intervention in Russia has actually brought about a sort of...
Yeah, not to go off on a tangent, but North Korean soldiers have proven surprisingly effective. I'm really surprised.
No, but also just the support that North Korea gave to Russia is giving Russia, like, it's getting Russia to give them money, which helps them in their relationship with China so that they're not too beholden to China. And so now you see, like, apparently Pyongyang is seeing a rebirth or a revitalization or whatever. So yeah, that's another thing to watch out for. But War. Sorry?
It's like a reversal of the Korean War. Instead of North Korea being dependent on Russia, now Russia's dependent on North Korea. So the reason why North Korea is relevant to this discussion about Syria is because they had the scientists and the experience necessary to build the sort of nuclear reactor you would need to enrich uranium, either for peaceful or military purposes. And I mean, look, it's honestly, you know, we've talked about how like WMD is so politicized. And when people hear that, like, North Korea is helping Syria build nuclear weapons, especially in the mid-2000s, right after the invasion of Iraq, I think a lot of people heard that and they're like, that sounds like bullshit. But it was true.
Yeah, it was true. And I remember, like, that one clip from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Like, it was crazy to hear Syria come up in the news in that time when nobody knew what the hell Syria was. And they made a joke about that, like, oh my God, it's going to change my life. Nobody can go to Syria anymore. But yeah, it's
by the way, there's...
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, you go ahead. You finish your point. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's it. That's all I had to say. Go ahead.
Well, one of the little talked about parts about Israel destroying that nuclear reactor, there's like a little wrinkle in the story that's going to sound familiar to current events. So Israel, you know, whenever Israel does something like this, they always go to America first, just to... Sometimes they let us know, sometimes they don't. But in this case, they're like, yeah, this is a big deal. We better call Uncle Sam. So they reached out to us. We probably also helped them figure out what was going on because we keep a close eye on North Korea. Actually, I'm speculating here. We may have traded some information with them. Maybe we got some stuff on Syria in exchange for some stuff we gave them about North Korea. Maybe. I think the U.S. intelligence community has more intel on North Korea than Mossad, but I could be wrong. So yeah, there was a degree of collaboration between Israel and the United States with Operation Orchard, aka Operation Outside the Box. And Israel, this is the wild part, Israel actually asked the U.S. government to bomb that reactor.
Of course, it looks better when U.S. does it than... Yeah, of course. They'd much rather you always do the dirty work for them, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, you know, why does that sound familiar? Oh, yeah, you're wrong.
Right. All right.
This shit just keeps repeating itself. Like there was like that nuclear... Iraq had a nuclear reactor in the 80s that Israel destroyed. Assad has a nuclear reactor that they destroy in the 2000s. Iran has nuclear reactors they destroy in the 2010s. This shit is just endless. It's just like the only thing that changes is the location.
Hopefully next time we speak, it will be the thing that's changing is slowly like U.S. and Israel decoupling their policies or their collaboration, because I think like it's starting to cost the USA more than it used to, even though they've always kind of collaborated regardless of the cost because it was just worth it. I think the fact that they have way more Arab allies now is like making the whole like we need Israel in the Middle East, even if we didn't have it, we'd invent one. It's like you've got compliant regimes all over the Middle East. What do you need in Israel for anymore? You know, I think it's becoming less of a bipartisan consensus thing. You know,
sometimes Israel does deniable work for America. That is one of the things. There have been times where we heard about something and then it was like, you know, it was either difficult for us to do or really dangerous or would have looked really bad if we got caught. So we outsourced the job to Israel. The best example I can give would be the assassination of an Al-Qaeda commander in Tehran, Iran, of all places. I know that sounds weird.
That doesn't sound weird.
Hiding in Iran, but
there are Al-Qaeda hiding. Iran hid Taliban, hid Al-Qaeda. It's had collaboration with Sunni militants before, and people don't know about that. But you're right. Yeah.
Iran is much more pragmatic in terms of their extremism. That might sound counterintuitive, but you get what I mean.
No, I get exactly what you mean.
More pragmatic than like ISIS.
All right.
Can we talk one last point about the proliferation of like civilian nuclear energy in the region, or at least proliferation of nuclear enrichment? So, you see this from like Saudi, Egypt, Jordan, potentially Syria now.
Yeah.
I think you had some thoughts on developing nuclear energy, or did you already say them?
Yeah, I just said I think I was talking about the efficiency stuff and how it's the best energy resource technically in terms of how efficient it is, you know. But that's it, really.
Okay. I will say you're right about that. That is true. I have misgivings about nuclear energy because of the risk of accidents. We see examples like Chernobyl and Fukushima in the U.S. And look, obviously that was in the past. The technology's gotten better, but nuclear energy, I'm not like against it, but you gotta be really fucking careful with it. You gotta be real careful with it. If any mistake or accident or oh my god, this just occurred to me.
Another earthquake,
nuclear reactor, not just an earthquake. What about sabotage? What if Israel or Iran sabotages a nuclear reactor in Jordan or Saudi or Egypt? I mean, that's a fucking catastrophe in the making there. That worries me a little bit. And look, I'm torn when it comes to like nuclear weapons. I understand that like it's chauvinistic for Western countries to wag their finger at other sovereign nations, say, no, you can't have what we have. I understand why the rest of the world looks at that and goes, fuck you. I understand. That sucks. And I understand why people disagree with that. On the other hand, man, I don't want any country on the planet to have nuclear weapons. The fewer countries have nukes, the better. I'm fully anti-nuclear, especially anti-nuclear weapon. I'm very inspired by the anti-nuclear movement of the 20th century. Look, when it comes to civilian use for energy, all right, if it gets us off fossil fuels, fuck it. But we got to be real careful with it.
That's what I'm saying. Like, you have to root it in your environmentalist policy too, not just your like non-proliferation. Because absolutely, we should support non-proliferation, but we should also support it as just a green measure of getting us off fossil fuels.
By the way, I'm going to say this one last point, especially for like anyone listening who may or may not be like Israel supporters. If Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, or even Jordan wanted a nuclear weapon, all I got to do is buy one from Pakistan.
And I was actually going to mention, we just visited Pakistan right after making this announcement about our nukes, so...
Oh, that's important.
Yeah. All right, any last comments before we close off the chat? This was wonderful, and I really appreciate you being here. Hopefully we'll do this soon again. And actually, guys, Sean is going to open up his own Twitch account someday soon. But we'll address that in the next call. Thank you so much, Sean.
All right. Thank you.
I'm going to try to change my clothes. All right. Take care, guys. Thanks so much, Sean. Peace.
Thank you. Bye.